Hi teachers, it's Andrea Haas from Elm Tree Education, and this is another Lit Bit segment where I answer your questions about literacy instruction in just a little bit. So as a reminder, as always, please submit your questions that you have about reading, writing, anything in the realm of literacy instruction to the form in that address below. Okay, let's get started on today's question. If you've been with me the last few weeks, you've noticed that I did a series on the myths, misconceptions of the science of reading, but now we're getting back to very specific teacher questions on things outside of that. So today's question is, how do you differentiate for spelling/word work with a curriculum that doesn't differentiate? This is always hard. It's hard when you know that you need to be responsive to the learners in front of you, but that you don't have the curriculum materials to do so. So also not knowing the context, there might be some things that I'm not able to really address for you specifically. And if that's the case, please, and this is for everybody, you have an individual situation that you want to problem solve together, then schedule a complimentary 30-minute call with me and let's sit down and problem solve and support you in being responsive to your learners, because we know that's what works and what's necessary. Okay, so but I'm going to do my best to give you kind of an overall arching explanation, and hopefully that will still give you some guidance and support. Okay. We're going to get real clear on definitions because words matter, and when I say something, I want to know that you know what I think that means, because sometimes I can say something and you can say that same word, but our two definitions are different, or how we would see it being enacted out in a classroom is different. So let's get clear on a few things. First, let's get clear on spelling, which is literally just the process of taking a language and putting into a writing system. I think we often think of spelling as just the instruction, but it really is just having a representation in written form. Now, word study is where we don't just focus on the spelling, but we're also thinking about what the words mean, the pronunciation, the origins of the word, and the relationships with other words. And so it's a little bit deeper dive than just being able to spell the word on paper. And then word work, to me, is the activities that you do in service of your word study. So there's been some explicit instruction happening in word study, and then the activities to kind of try some things on and to maybe use some different modes of learning. Some more hands-on experiences are what the word work is. So that's word hunts, word sorts, even dictation of sentences that have the words, that have the patterns you've been studying, word building, word chains, word ladders. I mean, all of these things, like the making words where you have the cards or the tiles on the desk and you move them around and you have sound deletion and addition to make new words, all those things. Digging deep into the morphology, and just really having that time, those games to practice and, have a little fun with the patterns that you're learning. Okay. Phonology is just the study of the sound system, right? So those are the phonemes that we're talking about, the rhyme, the syllables, where we put the accents when we say a word, right? Oftentimes, if we are differentiating spelling, we're doing it based on phonology. What are the phonemes that you need to study, because it's evident that those are ones that you're maybe using but confusing or don't even have showing up in your writing. Morphology, here I'm going to kind of get myself to be a little bit smaller so I don't block the text here, is the study of meaningful word units, so morphemes. So this is where we're talking about the prefixes, the suffixes, the base, the root words, and how that knowledge of those units helps you not only spell, but also even understand and maybe help you with vocabulary when you see those units in other words. And it just also helps you, again, with spelling. If you know that eat is the base and ing is an ending, then that can help you potentially spell eating. Okay. Orthographic knowledge. This is just that you know how English works, that you know those rules. For example, you know that we never put that grapheme CK together at the beginning of a word. Just doesn't happen. That's not where we see it. So you just like learn the rules of how we spell. Now, etymology is where we actually get into the history and the origin of the word. And for English, we are a big mix of all sorts of different influences. We have that fairly heavy Anglo-Saxon layer, but then we have some Greek and Latin in there. We're pulling in a little bit of French. We're pulling in a little bit of Spanish. I mean, pulling in lots of different words from different origins, and then taking on those rules for those languages, right? So, for example, fairly traditionally, we teach children that digraph, that CH digraph, is a ch sound, right? When we see the CH together. However, knowing that the word chef, where we do not say the ch sound for CH, is French, might help some students realize, oh, that's why it doesn't say the ch sound. And when I'm trying to spell chef, I don't put like an SH, okay? Greek, same thing. Knowing that it's Christmas, not, I don't even know if I can say it, Christmas. I can't even say it right because I know the rules, right? So just being aware of that, and even like the word Czech, like Czechoslovakia, Czech, that's a CZ like that we have taken on with that ch sound. So it's so easy, obviously, for people to be like, oh, English just doesn't make sense. There's no rules. Well, it does make sense, especially when you know where the words are coming from and the fact that like we're borrowing somebody else's phonetic system, not necessarily our own. Okay. So you need all of these things for spelling, right? We've talked about many of them. The other two are definitely foundationally, we need semantic knowledge. So we have to know meaning, because meaning is going to affect what words we choose to use, where we put them in a sentence, but then also like how they might be spelled. Because if we are thinking of the word deer, for example, the animal deer, or like, oh dear, or dear, can you get that for me? Those like a term of endearment, right? Speaking of, and we need to know which one are we using, because that tells us how to spell it, right? So meaning is really that foundation piece, and you've got to have that together. And sometimes in spelling instruction, we have not focused as much on the meaning, when actually that's kind of the foundation. And then once you get it into your visual knowledge and it's in your memory, obviously you're not needing to call on these other skills. It comes more automatic. But if you're somebody who is trying to spell a word that you don't normally spell and you're really thinking about it, you're going to use all of these sources to help you spell. Okay. The traditional weekly spelling test is not an instructive assessment. It simply has become a routine embedded into the teaching psyche of many. It's true. We've been doing weekly spelling tests for a long time. I'm sure that many of you had spelling tests when you were in elementary school, where you got a list of words on Monday and then you memorized them for the test on Friday, but maybe or maybe not, you were able to transfer that knowledge to your authentic writing, right? There are so many ways that we can make learning unnecessarily hard for kids. So that idea of sending home that random list of words, just a random list of words on Monday for a test on Friday, is really not helping them, especially because half the time when we give those words to kids, they don't even know what they mean. And we haven't done any explicit teaching. And so it's really all memorization in that case. Now, the other thing that we can do is maybe we do talk about phonological knowledge, and we do start looking at some of those patterns, those sound letter patterns. But we can't really stop there, because just as I said, like meaning has to be part of it. We're doing kids a disservice if we're not showing them some of the orthographic knowledge that they might need to know, or the morphology that they could maybe know to help them. So we have to be giving them, again, that whole range of skills somehow in their word study. Also, traditional spelling tests are not instructional. We don't take those assessments and then tweak our instruction based on the results. Traditionally, those assessments are just basically highlighting what you didn't memorize over the week and you didn't understand, and you're just copy editing because you're not doing anything instructional with it at all. It's just you got it or you didn't. And there was no actual teaching involved in this kind of spelling instruction. Okay. All right. Oh, I'm going to kind of move myself over so I'm not covering up the quote. Spelling or orthographic knowledge provides the underlying foundation for the rapid and efficient encoding, that's just spelling, that's like writing the sounds, and decoding of words, allowing individuals more room for thinking and planning as they write and read. And isn't that the goal for everything that we're doing, right? We want to build fluency in reading so that the kids have their minds free to be thinking more deeply about the text. Having them work on decoding and encoding at the same time makes so much sense because it's the same patterns that they need to know in order to read the words and in order to write the words. And so too often, though, we have those separated. We actually have the spelling work or the word study at like a completely different time. It's not embedded in the reading. We don't necessarily put it in their authentic writing or give them time to practice it in authentic ways. And so that's why we don't see the carryover, because there hasn't been some explicit teaching that's really like connecting all the dots so that the kids don't see it as like something random that's over here that has nothing to do with everything that's happening over there. Now, there are two, I'll get myself a little bigger now. There are two kind of schools of thought when it comes to spelling. A lot of you are probably familiar with the spelling stage theory, where really there's like an order, there's like a progression. You see where the kids are on that progression, you start there, and then instruction goes forward, right? A program that does that is Words Our Way. So for those of you who are familiar with Words Our Way, that's a spelling stage program. Now, there's another theory out there. There's a few, but these are the two most popular. That's repertoire based. So it's really talking about incorporating all of that knowledge that we talked about on that wheel, the 6 pieces that are needed, so that you are giving kids lots of different ways for them to pull strategies to figure out the spelling of words, without having them have to just go right to visual knowledge and memorization. Now, I think these two actually really go together really well. If you wanted to think of it that way, like you can consider that kids are in stages, but then also make sure that you're doing some of that repertoire work within the stages and not waiting till way later to introduce some of the, affixes and some of the etymology that you might wait until way, way later. You can do earlier, because we've seen that it needs to be integrated and you have to have that full repertoire. Okay. Oop, I'm going to have to really, you won't be able to see anything. Okay. So if you are using a spelling stages approach, many of you are probably familiar with this, but I just want to say clearly, you have to have some sort of assessment to understand their strengths and their areas for growth, right? Otherwise you don't know how to differentiate, right? You can just look at their writing samples and pull words that they're misspelling off of their writing. It doesn't have to be a formal assessment, but it does need to be something that would give you enough information to know kind of where to start. A lot of people use a spelling inventory. So yeah, Words Our Way has spelling inventory. It's been around for a long time. The Morrison McCall spelling list, you can get both of these. Actually, I think you can find the spelling inventories online if you just do a Google search. But you can use that to analyze where they have misspelled words and look for which spelling patterns that they're, maybe they've started to use but are confusing or don't have at all. And then it will tell you where to start. Now, a lot of you are probably familiar, if you're familiar with Words Our Way at all, you know these stages, right? So like there's the emergent stage. We're talking about more like kindergarten, maybe first. And then there's the letter name stage. Then it goes on to the all 5 stages. But again, what the repertoire folk would say is that we shouldn't be waiting for these letter name kids to understand syllables and affixes, prefixes and suffixes, all the way there. Or what if like a kid is getting stuck with some of the phonology stuff, and then they're never being exposed to some of those morphology or etymology stuff that would help them like understand how to read and write better. And of course, we know like rarely are poor spellers good readers, unless they just have like a super extensive sight word vocabulary. So, I mean, it can happen, but they go hand in hand because they're integrated. And that's how we should be teaching them. Okay, moving myself again. So the repertoire theory approach would be the same thing. You would need to have the same 3 first steps. Like you got to either look at their writing, you have to have an inventory, you have to have some sort of assessment so that you can analyze errors. But how you analyze the errors is not for what stage they're at, but more about thinking ahead about, what phonics are they using that could be like, if they have a word error that is plausible, it's just not really how the rule works. You want to note that. Maybe they're spelling word parts correctly, just not all of the word parts correctly. Maybe they are showing that they know some letter patterns and rules, but not all of them. And then you're not really analyzing for etymology because you don't know if they know the origin of the word, but it's not diagnostic that way. But it could tell you that it could be helpful to like pull some of that in if like some of these words that they are misspelling are, if they knew that piece, that might support them. So in this approach, you might have kids grouped in 4 different groups based on kind of like what they are needing. However, I would say that in the phonology group, like you could have you could have a wide variety because as we just saw with the spelling stages, there are 5 stages, right? So that one might be tricky and it might make for more groups. So that's why I think if could be kind of a little bit of a marriage between the two where you are using the spelling stages, but you are also intentionally putting in all 4 of these into the instruction, explicitly into your instruction, then I think you'll see a lot more growth in both reading and in writing. And again, not doing it in a siloed time. Like this should be all part of one literacy block. I know I said that before in some of the previous lit bits, but in the best case scenario, you're not doing things at separate times of the day. You're doing them so that they're all related and connected and so that the kids can see those relationships. Okay. Okay. I guess that one last thing before I move on is, so that said, yeah, do I have a curriculum that you could use? Yes. I mean, you could use Words Their Way. I know that one of the trickier parts of Words Their Way is the management of all the materials and all the word sorts and all of that business. But it is differentiated. Now, I also think that myself included, using Words Their Way, but not having it be having any explicit instruction in it is where it may have fallen apart for you in the past. I've worked with Words Their Way for years, both as myself as a classroom teacher and supporting other teachers, and I often found that because it was a lot to manage, sometimes some groups got handed their word sort to cut and sort, and then you didn't actually have time to come around and give them the explicit instruction that they needed. And maybe you also didn't spend any time talking about the word meanings, and you didn't spend any time playing around with some of these other, morphology, etymology, like all of those kinds of things. And so that's why you never saw the transfer, because there was no explicit instruction. So with that lens, if you are somebody who has tried Words Their Way before, and now you're looking for something like, maybe it's not a bad idea to pull your Words Their Way stuff out again, but with a different lens this time and a different way to approach it. And if you're someone who has never, ever used Words Their Way, it's fairly inexpensive. I mean, I think you can buy it on Amazon. Or you can come up with your own. But that would probably mean that you have some sort of other resource that has some sort of continuum of the rules that you want to introduce, and thinking about which words could you pick from to use to support your learners and how, and all that business. And that might be a little bit more work than you want to put into it. So I think it depends on, and by the way, when I say put into it, I know the demands on your time, and there are a lot. So I'm not saying that you don't want to put in work to help kids. I'm just saying that the preparation of materials is sometimes not the best use of your time, but it's what takes up all the time. So that's what I want to say there. Okay. Again, if you are somebody, here, I'll put myself back up here. If you are someone who feels like, yeah, but Andrea, I still don't know how I would do this in my room, in my situation, then please, please, please book a session and we'll sit down and we will talk over Zoom about what you've got going on, who are your kids, how does your schedule work, and try to break it down. And you get a complimentary session. So if you haven't already had a session with me before, that would be on the house. Okay. And if you have another question, maybe this sparked another question that you have about word study in general, then please submit your question, or it can be about anything else in reading and writing instruction, and it could be on the next Lit Bit segment. Okay, take care, everyone. See you next week.